We were mid-dinner when Grandma turned to me and asked, "Is the $1,500 I send each month still enough?" I blinked. "What are you talking about?" The room fell silent. My parents didn't say a word. They couldn't. And what came next tore everything apart. I'm Alex. I'm 21 years old, and at my grandmother's 75th birthday party, in front of my entire family, she asked me a question that ignited a firestorm and burned our lives to the ground. Before I tell you how I uncovered a web of lies so dark it almost destroyed me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The air in my grandmother Margaret's dining room was thick with the rich, savory smell of roast beef and the sweet scent of cinnamon from the apple pie cooling on the counter. It was a perfect autumn evening. Outside, the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. Inside, the house was filled with warmth and laughter. It was her 75th birthday, a huge milestone, and the whole family had gathered. My Uncle James was holding court at one end of the table, telling a loud, booming story, while my Aunt Kathy listened with a predatory glee, always looking for a new piece of gossip. My cousins were laughing, their faces bright and carefree. For a fleeting moment, as I watched my dad, Robert, chuckle at one of my uncle's jokes and my mom, Elizabeth, smile that picture-perfect smile, I allowed myself to feel a sense of peace. We almost looked normal, happy, the kind of family you see in a Thanksgiving movie. I was sitting quietly, a ghost at the feast, trying to absorb some of the warmth. These moments were a luxury I couldn't afford. My life was a frantic juggling act. Classes, studying, and 2 part-time jobs that sucked the life out of me and barely paid for my tuition and cheap apartment. But for Grandma Margaret, I would always show up. I would move mountains for her. She was the sun around which our family planet orbited. At 75, she was sharper than people half her age, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She caught my eye from across the table and gave me a genuine, warm smile. It was a smile of pure affection, a smile that made me feel seen, something I hadn't felt from my own parents in years. She waited for a lull in the conversation. Then her voice, clear and strong, cut through the remaining chatter. The room quieted instantly. Everyone respected her. "Alex, dear," she said, her focus entirely on me, "I've been meaning to ask, and I keep forgetting. Is the $1,500 I send you every month enough? I know college is so expensive these days. If you need more for your books or rent, you must tell me." The fork in my hand stopped moving. It hovered halfway to my mouth, loaded with mashed potatoes. The world seemed to grind to a halt. A dozen pairs of eyes swiveled in my direction. My brain struggled to process her words. $1,500. Every single month. That was more money than I saw in 2 months of backbreaking work. I could pay my rent, buy all my textbooks, and maybe even fix the cracked screen on my phone with that kind of money. A short, confused laugh burst out of me before I could stop it. It sounded loud in the suddenly silent room. "What money, Grandma?" Silence. This wasn't just a pause in conversation. This was a heavy, suffocating void. The air became thick, hard to breathe. The laughter, the warmth, the happiness. It all evaporated in an instant. I looked around the table. No one was looking at me anymore. Every single person, my uncle, my aunt, my cousins, was staring at my parents. My mother's face was a horrifying mask of frozen cheerfulness. Her smile was still there, but it was brittle, grotesque, like a porcelain doll that was about to shatter. My father's jaw had gone slack, his face ashen. He stared at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. And my older brother, Ryan, the golden child, the center of their universe, had a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. The perfect family portrait had just been ripped to shreds. Grandma Margaret's warm expression was gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard clarity. She didn't need to raise her voice. The quiet menace in her tone was more terrifying than any shout. "Elizabeth. Robert. Explain." To understand the depth of that single word. Explain. You have to understand the world my parents had built. It wasn't just a lie about money. It was a lie about everything. The silence in that room wasn't new. It was the same silence that had greeted every one of my small victories. The same silence that had answered every one of my unspoken cries for help. It was a silence built brick by brick over 21 years. Let me paint you a clearer picture of my life. A typical Tuesday for me started at 6 a.m. I dragged myself out of bed in my cramped, chilly apartment and head to my first job at the campus library. For 2 hours I'd shelve books, the quiet hum of the library a stark contrast to the frantic pace of my life. Then classes until 3 p.m. After class, I wouldn't go to a coffee shop with friends. I'd go to my second job at a greasy diner downtown, where I'd wait tables until the 11 p.m. closing shift. I remember one night vividly. A group of rowdy customers had left a disastrous mess. Ketchup smeared on the table, soda spilled on the floor. My manager, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, just pointed at it and grunted. As I was on my hands and knees wiping up the sticky mess, my phone buzzed. It was a picture from my brother Ryan's Instagram feed. He and his fiancée Melissa were at a fancy rooftop bar, clinking cocktail glasses, the city lights twinkling behind them. The caption read, "Living the good life." I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat. I finished cleaning, my hands raw, my back aching, and went home with $23 in tips. That was my good life. My brother's life was a different story, written by a different author. In my parents' eyes, he was the protagonist of our family's epic. I was a footnote. They funded his downtown apartment with a view, paid for his car, and slipped him cash whenever he needed it. They called it investing in his future. My struggle, my exhaustion, my constant anxiety about making rent. That was called building character. As if suffering was a virtue, the injustice was a constant companion. A dull throb of resentment I carried with me everywhere. But the real poison in our family's well came from a promise that had been my only source of hope. I was 18, standing in the same dining room, clutching my university acceptance letter. I had graduated as valedictorian, earned a small academic scholarship, and I was so proud. I thought they would be too. My parents offered a quick, "Good job, son," before turning their full attention to Ryan, who was excitedly explaining his new idea to start a podcast about craft beer. I felt myself shrink, becoming invisible once again. But Grandma Margaret saw me. She always saw me. She pulled me into the kitchen, away from the others, and took the letter from my hands. She read it, her eyes shining with genuine pride. "Alexander, this is wonderful," she said, her voice filled with warmth. She put her hands on my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "You have a fire in you, a brilliant mind. Don't ever let them or anyone else diminish that. Do you hear me?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Good," she said, giving me a tight hug. "Now you listen to me. Your only job is to go to that university and learn. You focus on your studies. Don't you dare worry about money. I am going to take care of you. I'll send you an allowance every single month, more than enough for whatever you need. This is my investment, and you are the best investment I could ever make." I cried. Right there in her kitchen, I cried with relief and gratitude. Her promise wasn't just about money. It was validation. It was proof that someone in my family believed in me. That promise became my anchor. So, when I started college and week after week, month after month went by with no money, the confusion was agonizing. Did she forget? Did I mishear? Was I not worthy of the investment after all? The shame and fear of seeming ungrateful kept me silent. I told myself I could handle it. I got a job. Then, when that wasn't enough, I got a second one. I built my life around building character. About 6 months into my freshman year, I hit a wall. I was failing a class. I was constantly sick. And I was on the verge of dropping out. I was desperate. I finally worked up the nerve to ask my mother about the money. I found her in the kitchen, arranging a bouquet of expensive-looking lilies. She was humming. Cleared my throat. "Hey, Mom, can I ask you a quick question?" Her humming stopped. She turned, her smile polite but distant. "Of course, dear. It's just, did Grandma ever happen to mention anything about, helping out with my college expenses?" I tried to sound casual like it was no big deal. Her polite smile tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, a while ago, she said she might send some money to help out. And I was just wondering if maybe the checks got sent here by mistake or something." Her laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "Alexander, you're 21 years old. Are you seriously asking me about an allowance? Your brother is out there, making a life for himself, being independent. And you're here asking for handouts? I thought we raised you to be more self-reliant than that." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to make me feel small and ashamed. "But Mom," I stammered, the injustice of it making my face flush. "Ryan lives in an apartment you pay for. He drives a car you bought him. I'm working 2 jobs. Grandma promised me." Her face turned to stone. "Don't you dare use that tone with me," she snapped, her voice cold. "And don't be so selfish. We have a lot of expenses. Your brother needs our support right now. He's under a lot of pressure. Family helps family. Alex, why is that so hard for you to understand?" You should be grateful you have the opportunity to go to college at all. Learn to stand on your own 2 feet. It builds character. There it was again. Character. It was their justification for everything. I just stood there, my throat closing up, the lies sucking all the air out of the room. She hadn't just stolen the money. She had stolen the promise, the validation, the one thing that had kept me going. And she had twisted it into a lesson about my own selfishness. I never asked again. I just retreated further into myself, worked harder, and let the betrayal harden into a permanent knot in my stomach. My cousin Tyler was the only one who seemed to understand. During our late-night video calls, he'd see the dark circles under my eyes. "Dude, you look like a zombie," he'd say. "Let me guess, the royal parents are showering Prince Ryan with gold while you're eating ramen again." His bluntness was a strange comfort. Proved I wasn't crazy. Now, back in that silent dining room, the knot in my stomach was finally unraveling. The poison was coming out. My father Robert was the first to speak, his voice thin and reedy. "Now, Margaret, it's not what you think. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Grandma's voice was dangerously low. "Yes." My mother chimed in, her voice unnaturally bright. "We were just holding the money for him, for safekeeping. We were going to give it to him in a lump sum when he graduated." As a surprise, the lie was so audacious, so insulting, that I almost laughed. Grandma didn't laugh. "A surprise," she repeated flatly. "You were safekeeping $54,000 from your son, who has been working himself to the bone for 3 years. As a surprise? Well, when you put it like that." My father stammered. "The truth is, Ryan needed our help. He had a difficult situation. A rough patch," my mother added quickly. "A temporary rough patch. It's all sorted now." Sorted. They had stolen my future. And they called it sorted. I looked over at my brother. He wasn't looking at me with remorse. He was glaring at me with pure annoyance, as if my very existence was an inconvenience that had led to this uncomfortable moment. And I knew, with a clarity that cut through all the lies and confusion, I knew this was far from over. This was just the beginning. My parents' explanation was so flimsy it was insulting. Safekeeping. A surprise. They were throwing words at a house fire, hoping it would go out. Grandma Margaret, a woman who could spot a bluff from a mile away, was having none of it. Her gaze was like a laser beam fixed on my father. "Robert, you were a loan officer for 30 years. You know the difference between safekeeping and theft. So let's stop the games. What kind of rough patch requires you to systematically divert over $50,000 from your other son?" My dad flinched as if he'd been struck. "It was an investment opportunity." "Margaret," he mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes. "A sure thing. It went south." "An investment," Grandma repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And you, Elizabeth? You went along with this investment?" My mother, ever the loyal defender of her golden boy, puffed up with indignation. "We were helping our son. It's what parents do. We were just so worried about him. He was under tremendous pressure. We couldn't let him fail." Her voice trembled with manufactured righteousness. "So you let Alex fail instead?" Grandma's question was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. My mother had no answer for that. I couldn't stay silent any longer. My own voice, raspy and raw, cut in. "What kind of investment, Ryan?" I asked, looking directly at my brother. What was the sure thing that was worth my entire college fund? Ryan, who had been staring sullenly at his fork, finally looked up. His eyes were cold, devoid of any remorse. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, Alex. You wouldn't understand it. It involves risk strategy. It's a little more complicated than shelving books or flipping burgers." The insult, so casual, so cruel, was the final straw. The years of being dismissed, of being the family afterthought, of being told my struggles were for my own good while his failures were coddled. It all ignited into a single point of pure, clarifying rage. In that moment, I understood completely. They were incapable of shame. They would never believe they had done anything wrong. In their twisted worldview, Ryan was entitled to my future, and I was selfish for questioning it. And a dark, cold certainty settled in my gut. This was bigger than just the money. The story didn't add up. There was a desperation in their lies that hinted at something more rotten beneath the surface. As my internal world was imploding, I saw another drama playing out in the corner of my eye. Ryan's fiancée, Melissa, had been a statue throughout the whole exchange. Her face was pale, her knuckles white around the stem of her wine glass. She was staring at Ryan, and her expression was not one of support. It was one of cold fury, the way she was looking at him. It was the look of a woman who had just realized she'd been played for a fool. When Ryan made his condescending remark to me, it was as if a switch flipped inside her. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor, making everyone jump. "Ryan," she said, her voice dangerously calm and tight. "I need to speak with you." Now, in the hall, it was not a request. It was an order. My Aunt Kathy leaned forward, her eyes wide with gossipy delight. Ryan looked irritated, but he got up and followed Melissa out of the dining room. An awkward, tense silence descended once again. We all sat there, pretending not to listen to the angry, hissed whispers coming from the entryway. The acoustics of the old house were unforgiving. Lied to me from the start. Every penny. "Where is it, Ryan?" "That was my mother's ring." "How could you?" The argument culminated in a sharp, distinct slapping sound that echoed through the hall. Everyone in the dining room flinched. A moment later, the heavy front door slammed shut with a shuddering finality. Ryan reappeared in the doorway, alone. A bright red handprint was beginning to blossom on his cheek, a stark contrast to his pale skin. He looked utterly defeated, but his default setting was blame, not remorse. My mother rushed to his side, fussing over him like he was a child. "Ryan, sweetheart, what happened? Where's Melissa?" "She's gone," he muttered, finally looking up and glaring directly at me. "She left. Are you happy now, Alex? You and your big drama. You just had to ruin everything." He was blaming me. After everything, he was still twisting the narrative to make me the villain. It was breathtaking in its audacity, but my attention wasn't on his pathetic attempt to deflect. My eyes were fixed on the floor of the entryway. In her furious exit, a small white slip of paper had fluttered from Melissa's purse. It had landed unnoticed by anyone else, by the edge of the Persian rug. Even from across the room, I could recognize the gaudy, golden logo, Gold and Gems Pawn Emporium. My heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My mother's ring, the pawn shop ticket, it all clicked into place with a sickening certainty. The final vestiges of my fear and hesitation burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood up from the table. Every eye in the room swiveled back to me. I didn't look at my parents or my brother. I looked at the one person who deserved the truth. "Grandma," I said, my voice shaking almost imperceptibly, but filled with a new and unfamiliar strength. "Please don't let anyone leave. I need a minute. I think there are a few more investments that you need to know about." I wasn't the scared kid anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the one holding the key to the next locked door, and I was about to kick it wide open. I turned my back on their shocked faces, walked deliberately into the hall, and bent down to pick up the pawn ticket. My hand was steady now. The truth was my weapon, and I was finally ready to use it. I walked down the hall and into the small, powder blue guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. I needed a sanctuary, a moment of silence to let the roaring in my ears subside. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, taking a deep, ragged breath. The muffled voices from the dining room were a chaotic buzz. The sound of a hornet's nest I had just kicked. My hands, which had been so steady a moment ago, were now trembling as I unfolded the pawn ticket. The clinical, typed words felt like a punch to the gut. Item, 1.5 carat diamond solitaire engagement ring, GIA certified. Payout, $2,000. $2,000. He had sold his future with Melissa for $2,000. The sheer desperation of it was staggering. This wasn't a rough patch. This was a 5-alarm fire. And my parents were the ones holding the gasoline cans. My first impulse was pure rage. I wanted to storm back in there, shove this piece of paper in Ryan's face, and watch him squirm. But I knew exactly what would happen. More lies. More denials. My mother would conjure some elaborate story about the ring needing repairs. My father would stare at his shoes. They were experts at deflection, at creating a reality distortion field around Ryan. I needed more than a pawn ticket. I needed something ironclad. Something that even they couldn't lie their way out of. And I knew where to find it. Ryan's old bedroom upstairs. He was staying there for the weekend, and the room was a perfect monument to his arrested development. It was a place where secrets could fester. I took another deep breath, unlocked the door, and slipped out. The family was still in a state of disarray. No one noticed me as I bypassed the dining room and headed for the grand, curving staircase. Each step I took felt heavy, deliberate. I wasn't a guest in this house anymore. I was a ghost, haunting the scenes of a crime, searching for justice. The upstairs hallway was dark and quiet. Ryan's door was at the far end. I pushed it open. It let out a soft creak. I slipped inside, my heart pounding, and gently closed it behind me. The air in the room was stale, a mixture of unwashed laundry and cheap body spray. Clothes were scattered on the floor. A half-eaten bag of chips was on the desk. This wasn't the room of a man with investment opportunities. It was the den of a teenager. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. Where does a person hide their darkest secrets? I started with the desk, rifling through junk mail and old college textbooks. Nothing. I knelt and checked under the bed, my hands sweeping through a universe of dust bunnies and finding only a long-lost TV remote. Frustration began to set in. Was I wrong? Was this a wild goose chase? I was about to leave when I heard footsteps in the hall. My blood ran cold. I dove back and squeezed myself between the bed and the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I held my breath. The footsteps paused outside the door. I could see the shadow of feet under the crack. A moment passed. An eternity. Then, the footsteps moved on. It was probably one of my cousins heading to the bathroom. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding, my body trembling with adrenaline. This was my one shot. I had to find it. My gaze fell upon the closet. It was an old walk-in, cluttered with things Ryan hadn't touched in years. On the high-top shelf, pushed way into the back corner, was an old Nike shoebox. It was caked in a thick layer of dust, looking like a forgotten relic. In a room full of chaos, its neglected state made it the most suspicious object there. I dragged Ryan's desk chair over, the legs scraping on the hardwood floor. I climbed onto it, my balance precarious, and reached for the box. I pulled it down, a cloud of dust exploding around me, making me sneeze. I took the box back to the bed and sat down, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I lifted the lid. No shoes. It was filled with papers. A chaotic mess of them, bound by a thick, brittle rubber band. With trembling fingers, I slid the rubber band off. It snapped and disintegrated in my hand. The top few pages were what I might have expected. Never do credit card bills with terrifying balances. Final notices from cell phone companies. All in Ryan's name. It was bad, but it wasn't the smoking gun. I dug deeper, and then I found it. The thing that changed everything. It was a thick sheaf of letters, all from the same company, West Shore Capital Solutions. The name sounded vaguely sinister. The letters themselves were written in aggressive, bold fonts. Final notice before legal action. Immediate payment required to avoid wage garnishment. These weren't friendly reminders. These were threats from a debt collector. A loan shark with a letterhead. But that wasn't the part that made my vision swim. It was the name and address at the top of the page. The address was for my dingy freshman year dorm room. An address I hadn't lived at in over 2 years. And the name. The name the loan was under, the name they were threatening to sue and ruin, was not Ryan. It was Alex. My name. Couldn't breathe. Felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I frantically shuffled through the papers. It was all there. A loan agreement for $25,000. Taken out using my name, my date of birth, and my social security number. Information he could have easily swiped from our parents' old tax files. There were default notices, letters adding astronomical interest and fees. The total amount owed was now over $40,000. This wasn't just stealing my grandmother's gift. This was a profound, devastating violation. He had stolen my identity. He had taken my good name, the only thing I truly owned, and dragged it through the mud, saddling me with a crippling debt that could destroy my credit, my future, my ability to ever get a car loan or a mortgage. He had committed a felony against me, his own brother, and my parents. Did they know? Was this the rough patch they were so desperate to cover up? The thought was a physical blow. The $54,000 wasn't for a failed investment. It was hush money. It was to pay off the loan sharks before they came after me. The rage I felt earlier was a flickering candle compared to this inferno. This was calculated. This was cold-blooded. It was the ultimate betrayal. My shaking stopped. A chilling, razor-sharp clarity washed over me. The time for fear was over. The time for pain was over. It was time for justice. I gathered the pawn ticket and the stack of incriminating letters. I arranged them into a neat damning pile. I was no longer a victim cowering in the shadows. I was the prosecutor, and I held all the evidence in my hands. I walked out of the room, my footsteps heavy and sure on the old wooden floor. I didn't go back to the dining room. I walked straight to the closed door of my grandmother's study. I knew she would be in there. It was her sanctuary. I knocked twice, a firm, decisive sound. I was ready. I was about to detonate the bomb and level my entire family to the ground. Grandma Margaret was in her study, just as I'd thought. The door wasn't locked. She was sitting in her big, green leather chair, not reading, but staring blankly out the window at the garden, now shrouded in darkness. A half-empty cup of tea sat cold on the coaster beside her. The formidable matriarch from the dining room was gone. In her place was a woman who looked tired, defeated, and profoundly sad. She looked every one of her 75 years. She turned as I entered, her eyes questioning, clouded with a weary pain. I didn't offer a greeting. I didn't have the words. Instead, I walked to the magnificent mahogany desk that had been in our family for generations, and under the warm, focused glow of the green banker's lamp, I laid out my evidence, piece by damning piece. First, the pawn ticket for Melissa's ring. Then, the stack of letters from West Shore Capital Solutions. I took the top letter, the one with final notice in big, red letters, and placed it directly in front of her, turning it so she could read it. "This is the rough patch, Grandma," I said. My voice was quiet, devoid of emotion. It was colder and harder than I'd ever heard it before. "This is Ryan's bad investment." She leaned forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. She picked up the letter. Her famously steady hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the page. I watched her face as she processed the information. I saw confusion morph into disbelief, and disbelief curdle into a dawning, sickening horror. She read the loan amount. She read the threats of legal action. And then her eyes landed on the name at the top of the page. "Alex," she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. "What is this?" "It's a loan," I said flatly. "A loan he took out 2 years ago, using my name, my identity." She stared at me, then back at the letter, as if she couldn't reconcile the two realities. She picked up the next letter, and the next, her movements becoming faster, more frantic. She saw the default notices. She saw the escalating interest. She saw my name over and over again, tied to this financial nightmare. When she finally looked up at me again, her face was a mask of stone. The sadness was gone. The weariness was gone. The anger was back. But it was a new and terrifying kind of anger. It was not the hot, impulsive anger of being lied to. It was the cold, dense, and absolute fury of a queen who has discovered treason in her own court. She had just been shown, in black and white, that her own children had not just lied and enabled, but had been complicit in a crime committed by one grandson against the other. "He stole your identity," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was the verdict. I simply nodded, my throat too tight to form words. She rose from her chair. She stood taller. Her spine ramrod straight, the full force of her formidable personality returning like a tidal wave. All traces of the tired old woman were gone. "They will not get away with this," she said, her voice like ice. "This ends tonight." She looked at me then, a long searching look. Her eyes held a flicker of something. Was it an apology? Regret? "Are you ready for this, Alexander?" she asked. "I am," I replied, and the strength in my own voice surprised me. "Good," she said, giving a single sharp nod. She placed a hand on my shoulder. A gesture of solidarity, of alliance. "Let's finish it." We walked out of the study together, side by side. It was a paradigm shift. I was no longer the forgotten grandson, the family punching bag. I was her ally. We were two soldiers marching into battle, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting alone. When we re-entered the dining room, the chaotic energy immediately dissipated. The family fell silent, their arguments dying in their throats. They saw the look on my grandmother's face, and they knew the final judgment was at hand. Grandma Margaret did not return to her seat. She stood at the head of the table, a commanding regal figure. "Ryan," she began, her voice deceptively calm. "Earlier this evening, you belittled your brother by saying he didn't understand the world of risk. Perhaps you could enlighten us. Explain this risk." She took the top letter from my hand and held it up for all to see. "This is a legal notice from a company called West Shore Capital Solutions. They seem to be under the impression that Alex owes them over $40,000. As this is the first any of us are hearing of it, I'd love for you to clarify." Ryan's face went white as a sheet. He shot a desperate, panicked look at our mother, his eyes begging her to save him. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Don't you?" Grandma said, her voice dangerously soft. She then held up the pawn ticket. "And what about this?" "A pawn ticket for a 1.5-carat diamond ring. Melissa's ring, I assume? It seems your business risks now extend to stealing from the woman you claim to love." My mother, Elizabeth, finally broke. She shot to her feet, her hands planted on the table. Margaret, that is enough. This is a private family matter. You can't just air our dirty laundry like this. A family matter? Grandma's voice exploded through the room, making everyone flinch. My grandson uses his brother's name to commit identity fraud. And you have the audacity to call it a family matter? My own son and his wife lied to my face for years, stealing money I intended for their struggling child. And you call it a family matter? This stopped being a family matter the moment you decided to protect a criminal instead of your own innocent son. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. This boy who has done nothing but work himself into the ground to pay for an education while you handed his future, his very name, over to a common thief. The word criminal echoed in the silent room. My father, Robert, made a choking sound and buried his face in his hands. Grandma Margaret took a deep, shuddering breath, regaining her icy composure. Robert, Elizabeth, as of this moment you are cut off. Your financial support for Ryan is over. Every last cent you stole from Alex will be repaid to him with interest from your savings and retirement accounts. I will personally oversee the transfer tomorrow. She paused, letting the brutal finality of her words sink in. Then she delivered the coup de grace. And tomorrow morning, she announced, her gaze sweeping over the wreckage of her family, I will be on the phone with my lawyer, Liam. I am scheduling an emergency appointment to completely restructure my will and all my trust funds. The house, the stocks, the estate, everything. Her eyes, now completely void of any familial warmth, landed on my parents. I must ensure my legacy, everything Henry and I have worked for, goes to someone with integrity, someone worthy of trust. She didn't have to say my name. Everyone in that room knew. The tectonic plates of our family had just shifted violently and irrevocably. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I was the one left standing. The foundation of lies and entitlement upon which my parents and Ryan had built their world had just been swallowed by the earth. My mother stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. My father sobbed quietly into his hands. And Ryan finally looked at me. There was no more arrogance. No more condescension. Just a look of pure, venomous hatred. The look of a dethroned king staring at the peasant who had taken his crown. In his eyes, I saw a promise. This wasn't over. The silence that followed my grandmother's decree was the most profound of the night. It was the silence of utter devastation. The eerie quiet after a lightning strike has split an old tree in two. You could almost hear the frantic calculations running through everyone's minds as they tried to comprehend the new landscape of our family. The power had shifted, completely and brutally. And in that vacuum, it was my Uncle James who saw an opportunity. He had always cultivated an air of superiority. The successful, stable brother looking down on my father's chaotic life. He puffed out his chest, smoothed his already perfect tie, and adopted a tone of grave, condescending sympathy. Well, Robert, he said, shaking his head slowly as if burdened by my father's foolishness, it seems the chickens have finally come home to roost. I've warned you for years that your inability to instill discipline in Ryan would lead to ruin. A man must learn the consequences of his actions. He was trying to position himself as Grandma's wise counsel to scramble onto the winning side of the wreckage. He was a vulture circling, ready to pick the bones. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. A cornered, wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. My father, Robert, who had spent a lifetime being passive, weak, and agreeable, finally snapped. He lifted his head from his hands, his face a mess of tears and snot, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He looked at his brother not with shame, but with a lifetime of simmering resentment. Discipline? He spat, the word laced with venom. You want to stand there and lecture me about consequences, James? Now, Robert, this isn't the time. My uncle began, holding up a placating hand. No, you don't get to do that. My father roared, slamming his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. You don't get to pretend you're better than me. You think I'm the only one with secrets. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. You want to talk about bad investments? Why don't you tell everyone about last spring? Why don't you tell them about how you came crawling to Mom, begging on your hands and knees for $100,000 to save your oh-so-successful company from bankruptcy after your genius day trading hobby blew up in your face? Uncle James froze. The color drained from his face. Seeing his skin a pasty, sickly gray, his smug mask shattered, revealing the panicked fraud underneath. My Aunt Kathy, his wife, let out a horrified shriek. $100,000? She screamed, turning on her husband. You told me you got a line of credit from the bank. You told me business was booming. It was a private loan, a family matter. James stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. Alone, Grandma Margaret said, her voice cutting through the new layer of chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. That I have yet to see a single dollar of repayment on, James. I believe the term was short-term. The hypocrisy was nauseating. The family's self-appointed moral compass was just as corrupt as the rest of them, only better at hiding it. The room erupted, but Kathy was now sobbing and screaming at her husband. My cousin Tyler stared at his father with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, then stood up and walked out of the room without a word. It was in that maelstrom of greed and betrayal, as my family was tearing itself apart, that another voice, quiet but firm, imposed order. That is enough. Everyone froze. It was my grandfather, Henry. He had been a silent observer all night, a stoic statue at the far end of the table. He was a quiet man, always overshadowed by my grandmother's fire. But now, as he slowly, painfully pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his oak cane, he commanded the attention of the entire room. All of you, stop it now. The screaming and sobbing subsided, replaced by a stunned silence. He took a slow, deliberate look around the table, his old, tired eyes taking in the full scope of the carnage. He looked at my parents' utter shame, my uncle's humiliation, my brother's simmering hatred, and my own grim, hollow victory. His gaze finally settled on me, and in his eyes, I saw a depth of regret that shook me to my core. This is my fault, he said, his voice raspy with age and emotion. Grandma Margaret immediately went to his side, placing a hand on his arm. Henry, no, don't be ridiculous. This is their greed, their weakness, not yours. No, he insisted, shaking his head slowly, his grip tightening on his cane. It starts with me. He continued to look at me as he spoke to the room. It was my idea. All those years ago, when your grandmother first told me her plan to send you the money for college, Alex, I was the one who said, Margaret, just send it to Robert and Elizabeth's account. The simpler. It avoids any complicated gift tax paperwork. They're his parents, I said. They'll do the right thing and make sure he gets it. I thought I was being pragmatic. I thought I was being helpful. He took a shaky, shuddering breath. I never imagined this. I saw you, Alex. I saw you coming home late from your jobs. I saw the lights on in your apartment at all hours of the night. And I said nothing. I thought you were just driven like your grandmother. I didn't realize you were drowning. He turned his disappointed gaze upon my parents. My simple, stupid, practical advice gave you the key to a door you never should have opened. It gave you the means to betray your own son, day after day, for years. And for my part in that, for my silence, I am so very sorry, Alexander. I failed you as a grandfather. His confession was a gut punch. It wasn't an excuse for my parents. It was a tragic origin story. It was the final, heartbreaking piece of the puzzle, revealing how a small, well-intentioned mistake could, in the wrong hands, fester into a world-shattering betrayal. The fight drained out of the room, sucked away by the gravity of his words. In the ringing silence that followed, I finally found the strength to end it. I stood up, my legs feeling steadier than they had all night. I faced my parents and my brother, not with anger, but with a quiet, profound finality. I don't want an apology, I said, my voice clear and calm. An apology means you're sorry. You're not sorry for what you did. You're only sorry that you got caught. I looked at my mother, whose face was stained with tears of self-pity. I looked at my father, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked at my brother, whose hatred was a palpable force in the room. So this is what's going to happen, I continued. I am walking out of this house tonight, and I need time. I need space. A lot of it. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't try to find me. When I am ready, if I am ever ready, I will be the one to make contact. I turned my back on them. I walked over to my grandfather and grandmother. I put my arms around my grandpa's frail shoulders and hugged him tightly. Then I hugged my grandmother. Thank you, I whispered, and with that, I walked out of the dining room, out of the front door, and into the cool, clean night air, leaving the smoldering ruins of my family behind me. I didn't look back. Walking away from my family that night felt like stepping out of a burning building. The air outside was cold and sharp, but I could finally breathe. The year that followed was a slow, arduous process of reconstruction, like rebuilding a city after an earthquake. It was painful, it was messy, and there were days when the aftershocks of grief and anger nearly knocked me off my feet. But it was also the first year of my real life. Mama Margaret was as good as her word and twice as ruthless. The following Monday, my new bank account, which she had established with a single phone call, received a deposit for $54,000, plus an additional $10,000 for what her lawyer, Liam, dryly termed punitive damages and emotional distress. The financial pipeline to my parents' home was severed completely. Within a few months, I heard through Tyler that they had to take out a second mortgage on their house to stay afloat. I sold my brother's flashy sports car. The cushy, consequence-free world they had built for Ryan had evaporated overnight. The freedom that money gave me was staggering, but not in the way you might think. I didn't go on a spending spree. The first thing I did was quit my night job at the diner. I walked in, thanked Sal for the opportunity, and handed him my apron. The relief was so immense it felt physical, like a heavy, greasy coat I had been forced to wear for years had finally been taken off. I kept my quiet, part-time job at the campus library, not because I needed the money, but because I loved the peaceful order of it. It was my sanctuary. For the first time in my academic career, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I poured all my newfound time and energy into my studies. I met with professors during office hours. I joined a study group. My grades, which had always been decent despite my circumstances, skyrocketed. I made the dean's list that first semester and every semester after. I was no longer the exhausted ghost haunting the back of the lecture hall. I was an active, engaged participant in my own future. I also discovered what real family felt like. My cousin Tyler became my brother. He was my rock. He never pushed me to talk about the night, but he was always there when I needed to. He'd call me up. "Hey, man, I'm ordering a pizza and putting on the game. Get over here." Those nights, sitting on his lumpy couch, yelling at the TV, felt more like home than my actual home ever had. He told me his parents, James and Kathy, were in intensive marriage counseling. The implosion at the party had shattered their carefully curated image, and they were trying to see if there was anything real left underneath. "Dad's a mess," Tyler admitted one night. "He's finally realizing that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit." My roommate, Jake, was my other pillar. He was a quiet, unassuming guy, but he had a deep well of empathy. He was the one who found me one night, sitting alone in the dark of our living room, just staring at the wall, the phantom pains of my old life flaring up. He didn't say, "It'll be okay," or "You should forgive them." He just sat down on the floor next to me, handed me a beer, and sat there in the silence with me for an hour. His quiet companionship was more healing than any words could have been, and my relationship with my grandparents was reborn. We had dinner every Sunday, just the three of us. It was in those quiet evenings that I truly got to know them. Dad Henry would ask me about my political science classes, and we'd have long, thoughtful debates. He started treating me not as a grandchild, but as an intellectual peer. Grandma Margaret would tell me stories about her own struggles as a young woman starting a business in a man's world. They were showing me their true selves, their vulnerabilities, and their strengths. They were teaching me what a legacy of integrity really meant. My old family tried to breach the wall of silence I had built. The first few months, it was a barrage of angry, hate-filled voicemails from Ryan, blaming me for ruining his life. I deleted them all without listening past the first few seconds. Then the campaign from my mother began. It was a series of texts, each one a masterclass in manipulative guilt. One would read, "Alex, I hope you're happy. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high because of all this stress." Another, "We miss our son. This silence is tearing your family apart. It's time to let go of the anger and forgive." And the one that made me finally block her number. "I don't understand why you are doing this to me. After everything I've done for you." Not once did any of them contain the simple words, "I am sorry for what we did." It was always about them. Their pain, their stress, their needs proved to me that my decision had been the right one. They hadn't changed. They had just lost their power over me, almost exactly a year after the party. A few weeks before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. "Hello," I said. A pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in a year. "Alex? Son? It's Dad." He sounded different. Thinner. Tired. I stayed silent. "Listen, Alex," he said. And I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "I know you said not to call, but your mother. We were hoping you might consider coming for Thanksgiving. Just for dinner. To try and, start over." Be a family again. I closed my eyes. I pictured him, a man broken not by my actions, but by the consequences of his own. I felt a pang, not of anger, but of pity. But pity wasn't enough to make me walk back into that burning building. I can't do that, Dad, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was firm. There was no hesitation. I'm not ready for that, and I don't think I will be for a long time. But, son, I have to go, I said, cutting him off gently. I'm glad you're okay, but the answer is no. I ended the call. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-care. I had spent a year painstakingly building a new life, a life filled with peace, respect, and genuine love. I was the architect of this new life, and I would not let the demolition crew of my past anywhere near it. Another year has passed since that phone call. I'm in my final semester of college now. A few weeks ago, I got my acceptance letter to a prestigious graduate program in public policy on the East Coast. It's a dream I never would have even allowed myself to have back when I was running on 3 hours of sleep and a diet of instant ramen. Life isn't just stable anymore. It's full of promise. The Sunday dinners with my grandparents are still the anchor of my week. Grandma Margaret is already planning a trip to visit me once I move. Grandpa Henry gave me his old, beautiful fountain pen as a congratulations gift. For signing important things, he said with a wink. The gesture was small, but the meaning was immense. My life is full. My friendship with Tyler and Jake is the kind that lasts a lifetime. I'm even dating someone, a smart, funny woman from my international relations class who looks at me and sees me, not the baggage of my past. Every now and then in the quiet moments, walking across campus as the sun sets or late at night in the library, I do think about them. My parents, my brother, the raw, burning hatred has long since faded. Hate is a heavy burden, and I have worked too hard to be free to carry it any longer. What's left is a strange, hollow sadness. A grief for the family I should have had. I feel sad for the mother who was so blinded by favoritism she couldn't see her other child's pain. I feel sad for the father whose weakness allowed so much destruction. And I feel sad for the brother who was so consumed by entitlement that he saw me as an obstacle rather than a human being. The money, I realize now, was never the real issue. The $54,000 was just a symptom of the disease. The real crime was the slow, systematic theft of my self-worth. The real betrayal was being made to feel that I was worth less. Ironically, losing that money and discovering that truth was the most liberating event of my life. It forced me to stop waiting for their approval, to stop hoping they would one day see me. It forced me to see myself. It forced me to fight for my own value. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm not sure that's true. I think some things just kill you a little bit. They leave scars. But I've learned that scars don't have to be a source of shame. They are proof that you have healed. They are a testament to the fact that you survived the battle. My scars are a map of where I have been, and they are a constant, powerful reminder that I will never, ever allow myself to go back there again. They remind me that my worth is not determined by my family. It's not determined by my bank account or by anyone else's opinion. It is determined by my own actions, by my integrity, and by my courage to protect my own soul. It is the one thing no one can ever take from you unless you let them.